Hey there, best of Trekkers! Today, I'm for the first time going to dive into the world of video gaming, something I've been a fan of for longer than I knew Star Trek has existed. While this isn't exactly a new game I'll be reviewing, it's new to me, since the marketing budget for it seemed to be blown all during the holiday season, 6 months after the game came out. For the first time in more than 30 years of gaming, I'm left asking myself, is this actually a video game? That's the primary question we're going to answer today, while simultaneously answering, is this Star Trek? So, how can a piece of media released for all the major gaming consoles not be a video game? That definitely depends on your personal definition of what a game is, because what we have here is an interactive story similar to choose-your-own-adventure books I loved as a kid. The concept is pretty cool, and don't get me wrong, I've enjoyed my roughly 12-hour jaunt through Resurgence, and a second run-through to get the screenshots for this video and take a different path to see the other side of the story. And this is where I actually got more frustrated than my first playthrough. You might think a game that's based on the concept of putting you in the Trek universe to make decisions about how things unfold would have some good replayability. Unfortunately, the majority of choices you make amount to dialogue choices in a Fallout game that give you slightly different responses from NPCs around you, but ultimately funnel back into the same core choice. Don't get me wrong, there are several choices that have live or die consequences, but in a 12-hour piece of media, there are about 5 decisions of this magnitude. The rest of the time, you're just pressing a button every few minutes for the sake of keeping you awake and engaged. Sometimes you don't even get a choice, you're just asked to press a button to do the only thing you can do. There are a few moments that do resemble a video game, often quick action buttons you have to hit, which in 2 playthroughs I never failed. Most of these feel plain and simple like busy work. They're just there to actually give the game some video game-like things to do, even though most of the time you don't feel satisfied by doing what you're asked to do. They're simple little puzzles that get you to do little jobs you hear people being assigned to in Star Trek. There are times when you get to do actual fun Trek things, like tricorder scans and shuttle piloting, that are actually interesting. But even in the areas that you do get to explore are generally just single paths to follow with nothing to explore off the clearly laid out way to go. It's the most lazy gaming experience I've ever been a part of. The biggest insult I see here, though, is the complete bait and switch that's pulled by the primary ad that's run for the game. It features Riker and Spock, who are in the game, but Riker is only in 2 scenes, and while Spock gets a bit more screen time, the game isn't really about them. The trailer doesn't give you any indication that the game you're buying for $40 is a glorified long movie that does not star either of the 2 characters they highlight. One more major gripe I have with this game is the graphics. The character models and starships feel like they were designed for 15-year-old hardware, but simultaneously the aspiring tailor in me likes that you can see the seams in clothing when the camera gets close to someone. If this was a full playable game to explore, I wouldn't have a single problem with the graphics. But for something that you barely have to control at all, could have been pre-rendered in near movie quality. More than that, for a game where the developers have near complete control of the camera in the 3D environment, there should be no excuses for screen tearing, weird video artifacts during scene changes, and in one instance, a camera that comes back from a cutscene to settle inside a wall, leaving me on a black screen. I wasn't sure if my game was loading or if my console had crashed for about 2 minutes, until I pushed on the stick and realized what had happened. In other games, this would just be an annoyance you move on and keep playing from. But this is an egregious error in a game that's not fully controlled by the player. For one of the things that should be satisfying in phaser fights, if there was such a genre as a rail shooter that's not on rails, it would be the gunplay in this game. The game in general also could be described as a walking simulator where you don't choose where to walk. The game just doesn't know what it wants to be when it grows up. So before we move on to the Star Trek aspects, is this a video game? The answer is sometimes. And when it is a game, it does the absolute bare minimum to be called more than interactive media. Between walking straight down a path and getting a single choice, it doesn't do enough to immerse me in a game, and if it weren't a Star Trek game, I may have never finished playing it. It has just enough elements to make it a video game, but it's the absolute most lazy thing I've ever played. Now that I've thoroughly torn this thing down for the format we're forced to play, let's take a look at what actually makes this game shine, and that's the story itself. When I'm not doing random boring busy work, the story itself is quite good. I don't think it would make a great season arc or series or movie, but it feels like an extended Trek novel. It pulls on just enough Trek threads and expands upon them that it keeps you engaged with what's going on. I love how some of the chapter titles are plays on other Trek content and titles. It definitely feels like the lived-in Trek universe. The two main characters you switch between definitely have all the makings of Starfleet officers we've come to know and love. I always feel like I'm playing as Rutherford during the Diaz chapters, a quintessential grease monkey that lives in the Resolute's Jeffries tubes. One of my favorite moments is when they bring up that he shouldn't study something next to the warp core in engineering, which is pointing to all the careless times Geordi did dangerous tests with unknown stuff in engineering on the D. His possible romance with the soon-to-be villain feels a bit crammed in there with no time to properly develop, but I really do appreciate his Tendi-like friendship with Edslar, and their camaraderie is a lot of what kept me going on this schlog of a gaming experience. As for the Resolute's first officer, Jara Rydek, I have some mixed feelings. She's a pretty standard first officer that no matter what paths you take, always feels like neutral to the plot. It's cool to spawn some new lore about her race, the Kobliad, that was first seen in DS9's The Passenger. The thing that bothers me is that her race needs Duridium to stabilize their cell structures, and near the beginning it seems heavily foreshadowed that she might have an emergency during a key moment and need an injection. But it never comes. And for the amount of build-up, it was kind of a letdown when it didn't pay off. I don't want to touch on every minor character, but Captain Solano is probably the most useless Starfleet captain we've ever seen. Even bad captains that have done worse things like Maxwell and Ransom still always feel like they're doing what they're doing for the good of their ship or for Starfleet, while Solano is just out for himself. And if you've watched any amount of Star Trek, you'll probably find yourself defying his orders at every turn, because he's so self-absorbed. The rest of the cast feels like a normal Trek crew, and the voice acting is spot on. If you've ever played a Bethesda game in the last 15 years, you'll probably recognize a few voices. If I were to take this long story and put it in my ranking list of every episode of Trek, it would probably find a home at number 267 between Voyager's The Killing Game and DS9's Rule of Acquisition, or about a 7.5 out of 10. Pitting it against other video games, though, this is like a 4 out of 10. I hesitate to even call most of it a game, but I've definitely played actual games that are much worse. It's a piece of media that I'd say if you can get on sale, and you're a huge Star Trek fan, pick it up. If you're a hardcore video game fanatic, though, this might not be the title for you. I did enjoy my playthroughs, but I can't see ever playing it again. If you've enjoyed the review, please consider a like and subscribe. And I hope you'll join us nearly every Sunday for the channel's live stream Buffer Time. Until then, peace and long life.